Leith Van Onselen. Leith Van Onselen is a former Commonwealth Treasury official. These days he's economist at macrobusiness.com.au. Leith, you told me this some months back, and now the ABS says, yes, you're right. Congratulations on getting it right, Leith Van Onselen.
Yeah, cheers, Steve. It's actually worse than that, mate. The ABS has a little function called the population clock, which gives you like a daily update on the population. And I haven't checked it the last few weeks, but I'd say it's ticking up to about 27,400,000 now, because the data you're referring to is as of the March quarter, and we're obviously into September now, so it's probably more like 27,400,000 thereabouts.
How many people are we bringing into Australia on a yearly basis at the moment? So how many do we bring in the last yearly period, do you know?
Yeah. Well, actually, so the data we received yesterday was actually for the first quarter of March. The March quarter of 2024. So we got 133,800 over the quarter, which was the third highest quarterly volume on record. And over the year, a net overseas migration, we got 510,000 in the year to March. So it's still very high figures. Look, they have come down a bit. So net overseas migration annual peaked at 560,000 in the September quarter, and it's come down to 510,000. So it's still, it has come off a little bit, but it's still at extremely high levels. And once again, this was the third biggest quarter in Australia's history that we just got.
I need you to do some myth busting for me. I've been told repeatedly by economists that if it wasn't for migration into Australia, that our economy would be in recession. In other words, we would be going backwards economically. Is that accurate?
Yeah. Look, it's accurate, but it's meaningless. So the reason why it's accurate is because the economy grew by 0.2% in the June quarter, but population growth grew by 0.6%. So per capita, we went backwards by 0.4%. Now, basically, if you're growing the population so strongly, it's very hard to have a recession, but that's not the thing that matters, Steve. The thing that matters is what it means per head, per capita. And the fact of the matter is Australia has been going backwards for 6 consecutive quarters in per capita terms, which is the longest continuous decline in per capita GDP in the nation's modern history.
Now, so how can this be, given that all the stuff we dig out of the ground, we've been getting record prices for it. Here in Queensland, they upped the royalties regime. That governments are swimming in cash. How can this be?
Well, GDP is a measure of economic activity. So it's just basically the amount of economic activity in the country. And we are still growing very slowly, but once you strip out the population growth, we're all going backwards. And the thing that matters for households, so the economy is split up into 3 areas, Steve. So it's households, which is the biggest area, governments and business sector. And the household sector is the one that we all care about. And that's the area where we're getting smashed the hardest. And real per capita household incomes have fallen by 8.2% in the last 2 years. So once you strip out inflation, you strip out population growth, our household income has fallen by 8.2% over the past 8 quarters, the past 2 years.
Leith Van Onselen.
So it's not a great scenario.
Leith Van Onselen is my guest. He's chief economist at Macro Business. He's a former Commonwealth Treasury official. It's 20 minutes to 9. This is 612 ABC Brisbane. So with this high level of population growth, what does it mean for households? So that's all that really matters, you say. So what does it mean for the person listening to me right now? What's the effect on them, Leith Van Onselen?
Well, so if you're a Queenslander, which obviously everyone listening is, it means that you're going to have more pressure on your infrastructure. It means you're going to have more pressure in the housing market because the population's growing faster than the state government can possibly build infrastructure, or the private sector can possibly build houses. And that's one of the reasons why you have these congestion issues up there in Queensland. You've also got obviously a rental crisis because Queensland's population has been growing furiously. It added 135,000 thereabouts in the year to March, and 83,000 was from net overseas migration. You also got 31,000 arrivals from down south. And this population growth effectively means that, you're going to have more pressure on your infrastructure every year. You're going to have more pressure on the housing market because you cannot provide both those things in enough capacity to compensate.
In the past, I've spoken with different groups, sort of social groups, advocacy groups around migrants and immigration, and they say there is no evidence that immigration leads to these sorts of pressures. The data doesn't back that up. Do you agree?
They're lying. Basically, it's as simple as that, Steve. It's complete farce. I mean, you can't import into Australia half a million more people than the federal government projected when it first came to office in its first federal budget, and not expect there to be problems in the housing market. And what's happened is, we've had our 1.1 million net overseas migrants have arrived since the Albanese government came to office, and 500,000 more than they projected, thereabouts. And guess what? All those people need somewhere to live. And we haven't been able to build enough housing for them. We haven't been able to build enough infrastructure. And as a result, we have a rental crisis, and we also have congestion everywhere. None of this is rocket science. It's basic math. When you bring people in, when you import renters, you need rental accommodation. And we don't have enough.
Your compatriot at Macro Business, David Llewellyn-Smith, argues that that's one point. The other, what he describes as a lie, is related, and it's the role of the East Coast gas cartel in derailing the energy transition and in hollowing out inflation. We know that utility bills are very expensive and that business can't grow with expensive power. First of all, so what's the situation? Do we have expensive energy in Australia today, Leith Van Onselen?
Yes, we do. We do, Steve. So look, this is one of the biggest disgraces going around. So obviously, we built the Gladstone LNG terminals early last decade. And as soon as we did that, basically the East Coast gas market, because we didn't have any domestic gas reservation on the East Coast, politicians decided not to do that. What it basically meant is that now the East Coast Australia is paying international prices for gas, whereas it used to be cheap. And gas sets the electricity price. So as a result, we export 71% of our gas on the East Coast to China and Japan. We export more gas than they need. And what's happened is that has caused a shortage on the East Coast. It's pushed up gas prices. It's therefore pushed up electricity prices, and it's led to an energy price shock. And this does not happen on the West Coast, Steve. The West Coast exports gas as well, but their government was sensible enough to reserve gas for domestic use. And Western Australians have cheap gas and cheap electricity. Us mugs on the East Coast are paying extortionately high gas and electricity prices, and it's causing cost of living crisis for households. It's also raising cost pressures for businesses. It's deplorable policy.
So what do we do about this, Leith Van Onselen? So you've painted me a picture, two causes of this. High levels of immigration into Australia that aren't being tackled properly by any level of government. Well, really only the Commonwealth can tackle that. And high energy prices as a result of gas. Even though we have an abundance of it, we're paying the most expensive prices that overseas will pay. What do we do about this, Leith Van Onselen?
Well, simple, Steve. We just need to copy what every other gas exporting jurisdiction in the world does, including Western Australia. We need to reserve our gas for domestic use. We need to effectively require a set amount of gas to be provided domestically. We need to cap that price using cost-plus regulation, which is what we've always used for utilities, so that we have cheap and abundant gas for domestic use, and then that'll bring down electricity prices as well, because gas sets the electricity price.
So that's
None
for
of this
business.
is rocket science.
Okay, that's business. What about households and immigration? What do we do about that? Because Minister Murray Watt, the Labor senator, argued that migration to Australia has slowed throughout the year.
Yeah, slowed from absolutely obscene turbocharged level to just a turbocharged level. So, we received 510 net overseas migrants in the year to March. Now, the previous record before this post-pandemic surge was 310,000 in 2008-9. So it's still running at levels we've never seen before until this post-pandemic surge. So the whole notion that they're bringing migration down is ridiculous. Now, I'll just add, Steve, that the May federal budget projected that net overseas migration for last financial year, 2023-24, was going to be 395,000. In the first 3 quarters of last financial year, so up to the March quarter, we had 388,200. So they've almost met their target in 3 quarters, with 1 quarter to go. And what this means is that we're going to breach the federal budget's May projection by at least 100,000 people. So it's running so much hotter than the government ever projected, and it has ever since the Albanese government came to office.
So what do we do about migration? Cut it back?
Absolutely. It needs to be cut right back. I mean, it's at levels that are just completely obscene, unsustainable, overrunning both housing and infrastructure. And it's none of this is rocket science, Steve. If we don't, we need to run immigration at a level that is below the nation's capacity to build houses and infrastructure. Because if we don't do that, we're going to have lower living standards, perpetual housing crisis, and perpetual infrastructure shortages. It's as simple as that. None of this is rocket science.
So what level should the rocket scientists cut it back to?
Look, I'd argue for below 120,000 a year net overseas migration. That was the level we had, around about that level up until about 2005, when the Howard government decided to ramp it up. And that worked perfectly. You know, that was the post-war level, was between 80 and about 120,000. And that level worked beautifully. Unfortunately, the federal government decided to ramp it up in the mid-2000s, and they've just kept ramping it up. And that's why we have these constant problems.
Is anyone, any political party, any leader in Australia talking about doing that?
Look, Peter Dutton has talked about getting net overseas migration down to about 150,000 for a few years, which is better, obviously. But I still argue that's too high. And the fact of the matter is we need a much smaller quantity of much higher quantity of much higher quality migrants. So genuinely very highly skilled migrants in areas where we have genuine skills shortages and a lower quantity. That's the sensible way to do it. Unfortunately, we go for high volume and lower quality, mostly unskilled migrants.
I'll leave it there. Speak to you again. Leith Van Onselen, thank you very much for your time once again.
Yeah, thanks, Steve.
Leith Van Onselen, economist at macrobusiness.com.au, a former Commonwealth Treasury official.